The fact that a majority of Americans have a negative view of Israel is extraordinary. That didn't seem possible even a couple of years ago. But of course, because of the attack and the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, that's what we're seeing. I don't know how it's going to play out. What you're saying about all these other countries, like negative views of, particularly, let's say, North Korea or Russia or, whatever the country might be. I think a lot of those, like you say, those are not deeply held opinions, and they can be changed in an instant. It's like, and we've seen that, I think, with Trump started to say some positive things about Russia, and then there's, like the positive views of Russia just bump up by 10 or 20% in the opinion polls overnight, and that's, most people do not have strong opinions about these countries. But again, the exception is Israel, which we've talked about before. Now, there is growing resistance and actual real hatred of Israel growing in this country, but it's still a minority position. And the other side does have firmly held beliefs about Israel, and they've got their hands on the levers of power. So, they're not going to go down without some huge fight. Whether we're talking about war in the Middle East or suppression of free speech in this country, which is another thing that we're seeing, or like it seems like the opening salvo in an attack on the right to express criticism of Israel. Still, obviously, a lot of people, ourselves included, can speak very freely about it, but certain people, certain places like universities are being targeted over that, and it may be the beginning of a larger war. It's just like these people, again, they are very committed to Israel, and if they sense that they're really losing control, and I think they are sensing that, they'll start to lash out, and they'll start to employ measures that were previously unthinkable. I think we're seeing the beginnings of that. So it could be very, very ugly. Again, we'll have a real conflict within the country, not just a conflict overseas.
Don't you think that will just further the demise of Zionism in general, Zionism in the United States?
I think no question in the long run, there may be short-term victories, and you can say that actually they are experiencing those short-term victories, like, the threats to defund universities is having an effect. Those administrations, university administrations within the country are bending their knee to the Trump administration and, promising not to allow any more demonstrations critical of Israel.
That's crazy.
Even to police their curriculums and make sure that there aren't courses that are deemed to be anti-Semitic, which really means just, critical of Zionism.
Well, these are university students. They're supposed to be, above average intelligence. Hopefully they should be smart. Could they realize the hypocrisy of this? That, okay, you can criticize America on the campus, but there's one country in the world you can't, and that's Israel, the one that's committing a genocide that they all can see on their phones.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's what I would say is in the short term, maybe you could say it's a victory, but I'm sure it's been a very eye-opening experience for a lot of these people, for the students in particular. And these students, especially these elite universities, the ones that have been targeted, are future leaders of the country. So, somewhere, I think the long-term outlook for Israel, and support for Zionism in general is not good in this country. I think it will come to an end. It's just a question of when. It could still be, many years from now, but if I were a Zionist, I would be afraid, and I think, again, the intelligent thing would be to actually slow down, uphold the ceasefire in Israel, in Gaza, that kind of thing. I don't think it would stop this process, this decline in support for Israel, but it would slow it down. But actually, they're just doubling down on everything, and I think that's going to speed it up. I think they've made a mistake too about, they've had for so long, they've just had sort of almost total power within this country, and because of U.S. support for Israel, that Israel has been able to act with impunity, and it still does. But that has caused them to I think, overestimate their long-term strengths, and you know, and to do things that are going to hurt them again in the long run. There, you know, I think you can say they'll have short-term successes. Like, I think we just have to be honest. They had a short-term success in Lebanon. I mean, it was pretty horrible, and in Syria, but all of these things. This is an unsustainable course. You know, it's just like reigning through terror. Is not the way to go. It's obviously eating away at that support that they had, that rock solid support that really did used to exist in the U.S. is no longer there. You know, they still have control over the institutions, but the foundations are crumbling. And by the foundations, I mean like future generations are turning away from them.
Are there many Zionists that understand this and are advocating a slower approach? Maybe they still have that, you know, they still believe in the idea of greater Israel and taking the land, but they say, hey, let's roll it back to what we were doing before October 7th, when we was incremental, you know, a long-term process. It seems like that even if you were a Zionist, like you're saying, like that should be a pretty common sense conclusion. You understand that your whole project is beginning to crumble and fall apart because of what's happening in Gaza. It's very, very clear that, you know, people want to say, well, what's with this rise in anti-Semitism? Where's it coming from? It's like, well, I heard genocide is a pretty big cause of anti-Semitism.
Right.
It's like, so maybe if they stop that, you know, they could get away with it. But why is there many Zionists that are advocating for that? Or
I'm sure there's some. Well, you know, I can speak for, you know, the Writers for Haaretz, which is the main left-wing publication in Israel. And some of those people are, again, a small number of them are truly concerned about the lot of the Palestinians. And they understand what's happening. But many of them, and some of them I would put in the camp that you described. It's not like they really are concerned about the Palestinians, but they understand this is hurting Israel's image. And again, this is on the left. We're talking about like 10% of the population. So even within, you know, they're still kind of a minority within a minority. But a lot of these, even these, you know, so-called leftists, are don't seem to be concerned about the genocide at all. You know, they're still living in the past. It's like if there's a rise in anti-Semitism, it must be because of those just bad anti-Semites. They just hate us without reason. You know, that's kind of it seems like they haven't left that mindset. And, you know, it seems like you feel like screaming at it. It says, like, you know, if you're really concerned about anti-Semitism, stop the genocide. You know, you really got to focus on that. But even within the left, you know, I think that awareness, the need to stop the genocide, is a minority position. Now, I think you maybe see it more commonly in the U.S. You know, we had, it was a couple of years ago that Chuck Schumer, you know, made a speech against Netanyahu. And I think a lot of, you know, I don't know that it's a majority, you know, it's probably still a minority of American Jews, you know, other than the young ones who really are turning away from Israel and Zionism. But let's say a majority of older Jews that really support Netanyahu and these Zionist policies. They might not particularly like Netanyahu, but they're, you know, entirely in favor of the ethnic cleansing, though they wouldn't call it that. But there is a significant minority within that, you know, the Zionist establishment of this country that I think understands how this has really hurt their cause. So you have people like Chuck Schumer who are ardent Zionists, but they're, you know, they understand that this looks really bad. And they're also, you know, because most of these people are not Trump supporters. You know, most of them are Democrats. And they don't like this alliance between Israel and Trump. You know, it looks bad to them. It looks bad domestically, you know, among their people, among their fellow Democrats. And so they do want to see a change of course. And I think it's mainly for the, you know, the reasons that you set out. It's just that it's not that they're abandoning Zionism, but they understand that this Zionism in its kind of its current iteration is a real bad sell. It looks bad and is, you know, is putting the whole cause at risk.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the damage it's done to the U.S. global image, I think, can't be understated. I feel like prior to October 7th, or let's say prior to the Ukraine war especially, I think the majority of countries in the world, majority of people around the world would be like, yeah, we're happy with the U.S. as in its position as the global leader. Right now, do you think that any country in the world wants to see the U.S. as the head of the world, other than Israel?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'm sure there are some, but probably few and far between.
Like what? I can't think of
I
any.
don't know. Right. Yeah, definitely Israel. But, especially after this tariffs, because he went after the whole world. That's the thing. It's just like everybody is suffering from this attack. And so there are a lot of countries that are, again, are calling up Trump and begging for mercy. But that's not love. That's fear. That's these smaller countries. And there are, many of them around the world. There are a lot of small countries that really threw in their lot with the U.S. and have made themselves entirely dependent. They've been very good vassals, especially some of these small countries like Fiji or something that always votes with Israel and the U.S. and the United Nations when almost the entire rest of the world votes the other way. But they too got slapped with sanctions. That's like the crazy thing. So it's just,
Right.
the end result is there's really very little love for the U.S. I think that's got to be true. This
Yeah, I mean,
is
even in these countries
enormously
like
damaging.
right. I mean, even these countries like Fiji or Micronesia, I mean, they've been bought off to support certain causes and vote a certain way. But I'm sure the people themselves are like, oh, we love Israel and Micronesia.
Yeah.
I imagine they have phones they can see. So
Yeah.
that's just writing on the wall then, right? I mean, nobody wants the U.S. as top dog anymore. And if nobody wants it, it's just people will cheer and support the countries that are standing up. We're going to see people be supporting, and we're already seeing it. We're seeing people support countries that we thought unimaginable that most of the world would begin to support. Countries like China or Russia or Iran or Yemen. All these countries. And why are people supporting them? Because they're standing up to the United States, right? That's the primary reason.
Right.
And we can see that the whole globe is shifting towards that.
Right.
And the U.S. is just trying to play whack-a-mole and smack everybody down.
Yeah.
You get a tariff, we'll bomb you, and everybody's like, just give it a rest. This is nobody likes you anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, it's true. I guess. Yeah. Those countries that have stood up have become increasingly popular. The bet was on the U.S. side is that everybody. They assumed again that they had this great reservoir of support, and they did, but by their actions they greatly reduced that, and and further hostile actions will reduce it even more. So these countries are maybe a poll would show that there's, I don't know now after the tariffs, but probably prior to the tariffs, that most people still support or see the U.S. as a leader and are kind of willing to accept that. Maybe. But the popularity of these other countries is growing. There's no question. The countries that you listed, and they're growing. There's a certain respect for them because they stood up. And now, it took a few brave countries to do that. And I think we really have to point to Iran as the first, because they were by themselves when they first stood up to the U.S. If you go back to the Islamic Revolution at the end of the 70s. And they've held their ground, but now they're being joined. It's like they were all alone for a while, but now they have very powerful partners. They have Russia and China. And by the way, they recently had a conference, those three countries, the representatives of the three countries, to discuss the nuclear program. I think they're just coordinating their position vis-a-vis the United States and Trump. Now, the world seeing this, these maybe still be outliers, but there is a point, especially following these tariffs, that there are more and more countries are going to just say, no, I've had it. And you have a few brave souls at first, but at some point it becomes kind of, the whole process accelerates, where there may just be a few people standing off, but at some point it becomes a stampede. And it's just like, okay, when all those countries that are those governments that have been kind of are timid or, are just maybe acting against their own feelings, but acting on what they see to be their own interests. At some point, it ceases to even be in their own interest, and they just go to the other side. So we may see some sort of stampede like that at some point.